I haven't talked a lot about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on this channel of late because honestly, ever since she fired that Chakrabarti guy from her staff, she just hasn't been as interesting. She just hasn't been as compelling because all she is a not very smart member of Congress that gets way too much national media attention that when she had the progressive idea man behind her would repeat all these ridiculous policies in earnest and embarrass herself over and over and over again. However, that doesn't mean she's still not around. That doesn't mean that she still doesn't get attention. In fact, she's probably getting more attention from the mainstream media than the alternate media than she ever did before. And a perfect example of this is Chris Hayes from MSNBC, also known as the male Rachel Maddow, who from time to time drags Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez onto his show and throws her a bunch of softballs, and we always get a bunch of ridiculous, absurd, insane clips from her. Now, this video is no different. This video has absolutely delusional ramblings from Ocasio-Cortez, and that's what we're going to go over today. But I do want to point out that this video is sponsored, so let me throw it to the sponsor, and then we'll bring it back over here and discuss on the other side. A shocking report shows us that burglaries are up 35%, and considering burglary has one of the lowest clearance rates of any crime, that's not good. That means people are breaking into your homes more, and they're not getting caught. And considering they do on average in terms of damage and theft $2,800 worth of harm each and every time, it's important that you help yourself gather the evidence necessary in order to prosecute these criminals. This is one of the reasons why I'm partnering with camerabulb.com, because this little stealthy camera can help bring justice in case the worst case scenario follows you. You plug this right into your light bulb slot, works on Wi-Fi so you can monitor it from anywhere, and there's an SD card slot, meaning you can store hours and hours of high quality footage used to turn into evidence in order to protect yourself in case the worst case scenario falls upon you. Now, if you're interested in the camera bulb, you can go to camerabulb.com, get yourself 65% off, 30-day free trial. Trust me, you won't regret it. So the first thing that I have to identify, which is always interesting to me, is the title that they decided to go for. Now, MSNBC decided to say AOC and Raskin on the stakes of midterms, and then it says, we are facing an environment of fascism. So if you ever wondered if we're still doing the thing where we call everything that is not communist fascist, that is exactly what's happening right here. And here we have MSNBC, mainstream news, platforming an insane socialist congresswoman talking about how the Republicans are fascists, and if these people win these democratic elections, that will mean fascism. The only way that we don't have fascism is if the left wins, because even when the right wins elections, therefore fascism. And by the way, we're the party of democracy. We're the real democracy party. Just don't vote the way that we don't like, otherwise we're going to call that fascism. Now, there's a bunch of juicy clips in this. We're only going to go over a few because I can't stomach this much Ocasio-Cortez, and the first one we're going to go over is Ocasio-Cortez's inflation talking points.
And even when we talk about issues like inflation, a lot of this has to do with the massive consolidation of our markets and corporate greed. Our inflation is not going up due to government policies. Inflation is going up due to Wall Street decisions. And the idea that they can just squeeze us for every penny that we're worth. And we can also say that and acknowledge the fact that that's impacting some communities more than others.
So I just had to play that clip out there for you guys in full before we break it down piece by piece and laugh at every aspect of it. Now, the first thing that I do want to point out for the podcast listeners, because you might not be seeing Ocasio-Cortez's face if you're listening to the audio stream, viewing the audio stream on the podcasting platforms, Apple and Spotify, is the fact that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez legitimately looks like she's about to cry as she's talking about this. I don't know what's wrong with this person in terms of her emotional discipline, but this is absolutely ridiculous and absurd in every possible way, and we haven't even gotten into the substance of what she said, because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is under the impression that corporate greed is driving inflation, not any government policies. And by the way, a lot of people pointed out that Chris Hayes didn't do a good job of asking follow-up questions. Chris Hayes didn't do a good job of letting this go by, but the thing is, Chris Hayes 100% agrees with that. He's not a journalist. This is not a piece of journalism. This is a propaganda piece, and you can actually see him nodding along to the dumb things that Ocasio-Cortez said. So, first and foremost, This is just absurd. Corporations didn't suddenly get more greedy this year versus last year, so the idea that corporate greed is the cause of inflation makes no sense. Secondly, the idea that corporate mergers are behind this and consolidation is the thing that's causing this also does not hold water. The meat industry didn't randomly consolidate any more than it has already been in recent years in the past few years, yet we're seeing meat prices go up through the roof this year. We're also seeing the price of coffee and all these other items that didn't have a massive change in the amount of consolidation over the years spike in this country. Why do you think that is? Do you think that corporations just decided they could get more greedy this year? Or do you think that something substantial has changed and that might be due to government policy? Well, the answer should be obvious. Too much money was printed and production was stopped in the United States of America and in the world over, which, by the way, is one of the reasons why we're seeing worldwide inflation. And these policies were advocated for in large part by the Democratic Party. Now, Trump, by the way, under his administration, shot out a ton of money, and production was also slowing down under his administration. But this was all done under the guise that we had an emergency and we needed to blow all of this money. Now, to be clear, I think that Trump spent way too much money during the pandemic. Obviously, the lockdowns, we're going to look back upon them 10 years later, if you're not already there, as a giant mistake. Just look at the number of casualties we lost in the United States of America, and they were very close to the worst estimates from the virus. So we did all this economic harm and devastation to not only our nation, but the worldwide economy. We all basically did this pact together, and it was for naught. We did not see this great reduction in COVID deaths. The 14 days to flatten the curve did not save our hospitals. They actually never got overflown, and a lot of people still ended up dying. But to be clear, to zero in on what we're talking about, after Trump left office, we were poised for an economic recovery. Yes, there was a shutdown. Yes, there was problems. Yes, there are still problems in China, which is the origin point of a lot of our supply chains and their zero COVID policy. But essentially, things were ready to pick back up. But Joe Biden wanted to spend a bunch of money on his own rescue plan. He wanted to hand out a bunch of checks to the American population, and he decided to extend unemployment. And that is one of the most crucial portions of this. Because when unemployment was extended, instead of people being pushed back into the workforce, what ended up happening is a lot of people didn't take those jobs. And we actually covered it at the time when Joe Biden was expecting a month to produce millions of jobs, and he was short by something like 700,000 to 800,000 jobs of what the projections were. This is because a lot of people took the cushy extended unemployment. Now, the thing is, when all of these people had more money or a ton of money that they got from the government, but no goods were being produced, all of a sudden we had a total misalignment and prices started to go up, and we've been on that trajectory for a long time. On top of that, remember we were talking about the whole shipping container fiasco going on in California, where shipping containers would come into the US, but we didn't have the staff in order to put them back full of goods and then back on the ships and send them out, so we ended up with a bottleneck. Well, if you extended unemployment benefits at that time and those people stopped showing to work, every single day that they weren't showing up to work, more shipping containers were coming in, fewer were going out, and then we ended up with an even bigger hole to dig ourselves in. The longer that we kept the economy shut down, the longer it was going to take to open up. And extending the shutdowns, extending the unemployment, extending people getting way more money and demanding to buy way more things without actually producing more things, obviously had terrible downstream effects, and we're still feeling the effects of that. Now, the way the left likes to frame this issue is they like to say, oh, if you really think that $1,400 check caused all this great inflation, that one check that the American people got, then you're just a terrible person and you just hate the poors. But in reality, in actuality, I didn't talk about that one-time stimulus. Now, of course, that didn't help because it was intended to juice demand in the economy in order to prevent a recession. So obviously it had some impact on inflation, but the key issue was the overinflated unemployment. And I've talked about this on my channel before. The extra $600 that they stacked onto your state's level of unemployment was disastrous for economies across the nation. Perfect example of this, New York, where I live. We have one of the higher unemployment payouts in the country. It was about $500. And if you add an extra $600 from the federal government, that means not working. If you're getting the max benefit, you're collecting $1,100 a week not to work. That's $4,400 a month. And that is pretty damn good for not doing anything or any kind of job. So then you end up in a situation where the employers have to compete with the cost of you not doing work. And it's not like you just pay somebody $4,500 and they come into work. You have to pay them significantly more money to offset the fact that they're getting that $4,400, at least in my state, for free, or whatever it was in whatever state that we're talking about. I mean, just the federally added unemployment, which you could say was definitely necessary during the highest point of the crisis, and I won't push back too much on that, would still be $2,400 a month. And a lot of people in a lot of parts of this country can live pretty decent on $2,400 a month. And even if you can't live that decent on $2,400 a month, the fact that you're being paid that is going to make you demand a lot more from an employer in order for you to get off your ass and go to work. And remember that $2,400 was just what was coming from the federal government. It was always on top of your unemployment, always stacked above it. So you ended up in a situation where labor prices shot up through the roof, which, by the way, if you can go out and get a job in this soaring labor market, is absolutely great for you, and I don't begrudge you for that. But the thing is, if everybody's wages are being artificially kicked up and we have issues supplying goods and services, then what you're going to end up with is each and every good and service being more expensive due to the fact that wages are spiking up. On top of that, we have government policy that is impacting the price of fuel. Now, again, this isn't 100% on the Biden administration. Obviously, a lot of this is related to the pandemic. Some of it is related to what's going on with Russia and Ukraine and the speculation about what that would do to the oil markets. We all understand that. But the idea that we're going to shut down the Keystone XL pipeline and we're going to freeze out all the new permits for drilling in the country, slowing American energy production, and at the same time, the Saudis are going to decide that they're going to slow down oil production, and at the same time, because the Saudis are a part of OPEC, they're all going to do that in tandem, and everything's going to be all right in the economy is clearly not the case. We all need energy to do anything in this country. Everything gets transported in this nation on trucks, which are powered by diesel fuel. So if the price of that goes up, that is going to be felt by the consumer at the point of purchase, and any kind of distraction from people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which is to point at the people charging the prices, isn't going to work. Well, I would at least hope it's not going to work, but of course it might work, because anytime you've had inflation in history, all the way back to ancient Rome, people have always blamed those charging the prices, even though they're responding to incentives, rather than the policymakers actually responsible for it. By the way, another little trick that I want you guys to watch out for is when these people start talking about quote-unquote record profits or record profit increases, because oftentimes that's exactly what they're referring to, a record profit increase year over year. And one of the reasons why this is incredibly deceptive is because if your factory gets shut down by the federal government due to lockdowns advocated by Democrats, then chances are you didn't make a lot of profit in the year where you could barely produce anything. However, the profit that you will make, even if it's lower than in previous years, is going to look like a record year over year, which is what we're seeing with the left identifying all these companies or industries that are all of a sudden kicking back up, comparing their profits to the previous year, saying, wow, it's a record increase, and yet they're charging more money. These corporations are getting so rich, charging you more money. It's just absurd. The idea of price gouging is only something that's workable if you're an economic illiterate on a large scale. The way that companies in the United States of America, like Amazon, like Walmart, all these major retailers make their money is by selling you a whole bunch of stuff at small profit margins, not jacking up the prices so that they can make the most amount of money per transaction. When you have such giant economies of scale, you're trying to deliver low prices to the consumer, not high prices. And a lot of these companies, you can actually see that didn't lose money or revenue or whatever during the pandemic because they were in retail are also struggling with higher prices, and you can read their internal minutes from their publicly traded corporation reports where they explain that they're fighting to keep prices down because they're afraid of losing business to other people. Now, am I saying that corporations are trying to keep prices down altruistically? No, absolutely not. They're doing it because that is how their business model works. And this makes a lot more sense than claiming that corporations suddenly consolidated in the last year or so way more than they were 2 years ago, and all of a sudden they're just jacking up the prices because they got way more greedy. That's just not how it works. These companies are making less money in a lot of regards to their pre-pandemic levels due to the fact that their operating costs are going up. The idea that oil companies or Walmart or any of these companies can't make money selling you gasoline or whatever at lower prices is insane. They would make more money on the volume, and again, they didn't just become more greedy when coincidentally money was flooded into the system and production was slowed down at the same time, aka the conditions for inflation. Also, it's very important to understand that it is an insanely absurd fallacy to assume that higher prices equal higher profits. Oftentimes, what we find out in the economy is that higher prices are indicative of lower. And considering we live in a country that has essentially embraced theft wholesale, we're also all paying when we go into these stores. If you have one of these district attorneys or states that don't prosecute shoplifters, so you have it going out of hand, the cost of all that theft, all of that is priced into what you're paying. So remember, the increase in crime is also a contributing factor, though much smaller than the other ones that I brought up related to the price increases that you're paying. Now look, there's other things that are ridiculous about this Ocasio-Cortez interview. She talked about the evil white terrorism that's definitely coming for all of us, while of course ignoring the year-long rioting of Black Lives Matter and Antifa and all the destruction that it wrought across our country. But honestly, I just wanted to leave this at the inflation thing, and maybe I'll talk about that in the future if you guys want me to discuss it. As usual, if you like the video, you can share them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social media, support me via the support links, blah blah blah. Till next time.